Hello, everybody. Welcome to first ever Pharma CI conference, which is being held in virtual world. The topic of today's discussion and presentation is virtual competitive simulation, which was known in good old days as war games in a COVID world. My name is Rafat Rahmani, and I'm your presenter, and I'll be co-presenting this presentation with you today with John Gladish, my colleague. And we will give introductions ourselves. As you know, my name is Rafat Rahmani, and I have been in industry for over 25 years. And over this time, before coming to pharmaceutical industry, I used to work in consumer packaged goods. I was marketing manager at McDonald's Corporation and Pepsi Cola International. I did my undergraduate education from University of Houston, and then my postgraduate master in business administration from Manchester Business School. During the MBA, Eli Lilly and Company came at the campus and recruited me for their country-level management general manager development program. And as part of that program, I held various positions within Lilly, and one of those positions was marketing manager. And in 2004, I founded Lifescience Dynamics as a global strategy consulting company. We are headquarters in London, but we do have offices in the United States. And over this 20 years plus, we have had many pleasure to work with large pharmaceutical companies, both in competitive simulations and strategy projects, as well as competitive intelligence, market research, and market access. And we have a deep therapeutic and disease area knowledge of many diseases, such as CNS or oncology or other areas. So with that, I'll pass the introduction to John. Hi, John. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rafat. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. So I appreciate the opportunity from the organizers, Amy and colleagues, for this opportunity to co-present with Rafat. My name is John Gladish. I'm working with a firm called Epic Research, which is just outside of Zug, Switzerland. And my background is similar to Rafat's. I've worked a long time in the industry in mostly commercial functions, marketing, market research, CI. I also worked for some years in CI consulting. And then recently I was back in pharma, working in specialty pharma, again, doing more market analytics work. My role in this presentation is I'd like to share some of the learnings of converting what we normally would have done in person to virtual events, and some takeaways that you might be able to use as you plan to do these meetings going forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to Rafat, who'll give a brief overview of the purpose of these competitive simulations, and then I'll pick up again with the virtual conversion, if you will. Back to you, Rafat.
Thank you, John. So without further ado, so let's go back to strategic gaming basics. So before we get started, it's quite important that we define what we're going to be talking about today. And if you look at this matrix, which is on two axes, on one axis we have planning horizon, and on one axis we have uncertainty and complexity. So before we get started, simulation can be a powerful business tool, but only if you get the design right. So setting up the competitive simulation is critical of getting a good end result. And therefore, it's important to understand where we are and what we do. So using this very simplistic schematic, if we think of planning horizon, if things are over 10 years and uncertainty and complexity is really vast, then you may be needing to do a scenario planning. And these are for the events which are like natural disasters or something that is paradigm shifting. If you think of Kodak in late 90s, early noughties, it was one of the largest companies. Used to be in the Dow Jones Index, and now you see where they are. So if they would have done scenario planning, they might have had a different path. Then you have things which are like of shorter time horizon, so 3 to 7 years, 5 years, and that's where the strategic workshop is. When you do a strategy workshop, you would know the number of players would be known, the environment will be known, and you would have some kind of preconceived idea where you should play. But today we'll be talking about competitive simulation, where we would know the time horizon, typically less than 5 years. One would know the competitors and scenarios and where they should play. And one of the major output of the competitive simulation to develop a playbook, a game plan, how to neutralize your competitor and get a competitive edge in the marketplace. So just to continue our discussion, what is a competitive simulation is it enables our industry to understand the competitors better, deeper, identify the differentiating point, what differentiate us, and versus competitors, and pressure test some of those things, and then develop counter strategy for impeding events with a robust and tested plan in a safe environment, which is much more cost effective and less expensive and less risky. So if I go back to some of the big takeaway from running simulation would be how to develop a strategy to ensure that you have a competitive edge and advantage over sustained competitive advantage. Secondly, if I look at it from the big picture, it's like pressure testing of your tactics in a safe environment, in a controlled environment, where you can keep your confidentiality, you can keep your costs down, and then once your strategy and tactics are proven, then it's much easier to open it and you would have worked out the bottlenecks and the challenges in a defined and controlled environment. And above all, marketing is all about differentiation. And how do you define the differential advantages required to succeed in your marketplace, in whatever disease therapy area you are playing? In order to do that, the competitive simulation also helps us bring a really cross-sectional team. And they need to be well informed and prepared, and therefore their strategy need to be aligned and tactics ensure the business unit will achieve the objective that is fully prepared for any scenario. So there is also what you call obvious benefit, and there is also benefit which are a fringe benefit, should we say. But it is very important to have end in mind and define what is the objective. Because without clear objective, then the setting of the simulation could be problematic. Here's an example, for example, how will entry of product X and product Y change the competitive landscape in the market that you are playing? What strategy they are likely to implement and how you might be able to react? Can you test the plans and simulate various scenarios so that you're not caught by surprise? How can you differentiate ourselves, in our case, from our competitor? Leverage the attributes to your product to the maximum. How can our team be better prepared, informed, and to achieve the business objective? So these are some of the benefit, but also just going back to, this is very familiar image. Everybody in pharmaceutical is well aware of that we are in a highly risky business, and our journey is full of uncertainty and risk. And so the moment you get the market authorization, you have the sales, and this is not in the United States where there is option for increasing the price, but I'm talking about generally. You get if you take it in Europe and the rest of the world, you get a good price, and you stay in that price pretty much. And over a time, when you have patent expiry, if you are a small molecule, you have a really, really brutal generic erosion. But if you are in a mAb, then the generic erosion, which is the biosimilar erosion, is a bit better. But if you look at it, we are in a very risky business. And having testing the scenarios in a controlled environment will give you advantage. So if we take this this thing, sorry, it's gone up. If we take this in a better way, so if we take it in 4 big buckets, so you have clinical development, and for clinical, obviously we are making a lot of decisions, such as what will be the winning target product profile look like. And by the time you launch, imagine what other winning target profile are coming in your place, So how do you prepare for that? Clinical trial endpoint selection. before designing phase 3, how can you build in really endpoint that will differentiate in the marketplace, that has value in the marketplace, that the payers and insurance company are willing to pay for that differential, and also help you to model market access strategies, such as what will be the head-to-head comparator to get the higher market access price and access. Market entry strategy, launch simulation, positioning, counter strategy, life cycle man. So there are a number of areas and decision making where a competitive simulation would give you an edge, such as in business development strategy, partnering simulation, rapid deal strategy, red and blue team X strategy, and even towards the end of life cycle of the product and towards the end of loss exclusivity. You can simulate about the pricing strategy, whether and run through different options such as authorized generics, once a generic was a time scale and origin. So there are a number of opportunities during the commercialization stage or even before commercialization stage where competitive simulation would give you and your brand a competitive advantage. One of the challenges with over the years I have seen, the biggest challenge is scheduling and diary management and calendar alignment. We all know us in pharmaceutical industry, especially on industry side, are super duper busy. I think it is easier with the lockdown and the post virtual in era where people are not traveling. But it used to be very, very difficult to get 40 plus people's calendar aligned for 1 or 2 days. Typically, you need at least 2 months to plan effectively, but yeah, 3 months would be ideal. So if you look at the participation, you need a pharmaco, let's say it's a here, then it's a global pharmaceutical company, then, you know, the alignment, and we usually do a primary interviews and getting approval, all of that take time. So before you plan a simulation, whether it's a real simulation in physical, which post-COVID, or even virtual, please allow us enough time, enough preparation lead time so that the game would be really effective and beneficial. In a competitive simulation agenda, you know, we design to very detail the activity the teams will be doing during the event, and that will include a blend of functions and exercises that will be tested. So, such as these are some example of the typical exercise like brand laddering, red and blue team, essential statement formulation, strategic prioritization, competitive target product profile design, scenario ranking, ROI on counter tactics. So there are a number of things, depending on the objective of the game and situation, we will co-work and develop with our team to make sure that the right games or exercises are included in the exercise that keep not only the team engaged, but also tease out the issues that we are trying to do and trying to achieve. So here is a typical walkthrough of a simulation, which could take minimum 60 days, if not more. Simulation design and tailored approach helps with insights that can provide foundation for robust strategy. I think that is clear. So at the beginning of each project, we will have project design, and then after that, we will have a kickoff meeting. Then there's a briefing packs, which is these packs tends to simulate and the competitors. Then there's insight design, there's a competitive simulation workshop design, then post-workshop report and following meeting. So this is a typical journey that one would take to design a competitive simulation. And however, simulation are designed with the goal for organizational alignment around strategic decision. So it's one thing to have the strategy. There's another thing to pull the organization to achieve that strategy. And that is not possible without alignment. And So a well-designed simulation, though not a panacea, can be really powerful learning experience as well that allows manager to make better decisions. So if I put it in 4 buckets, so first and foremost, it helps us to share insight gathered through the primary or secondary or conference coverage as part of this simulation. It helps to assess the risk, pressure test the potential scenarios, and discusses potential meaning of each piece of intelligence. It allows us to openly discuss and debate implications and findings in the light of assets strategy. And finally, it helps us to align on a common goal, on a common next step with if we need to do new intelligence or anything like that. So the purpose of this workshop is to pressure test various scenarios to align thinking among all the team members. It also helps an opportunity to ensure the intelligence is meaningful, supporting the strategic requirement, easy to use, and actionable. So it is a powerful tool in the toolbox of a management. And I say in a toolbox because this is, like I say, it's not a panacea, not the only tool, but it's one of the tools that a manager should or a leader should use to effectively leverage his or her asset. So typically what happens is once the competitive simulation or war game is decided, usually there's a senior team member within the organization sponsors the event, and that executive will send an email out to the team members, and you will have typically 40 plus team members, multidisciplinary team. The upsides are business critical decision will be solved, the clear counter strategy remit. Typically, most of the war game pre-COVID used to be, from our experience, 1.5 days. That was our sweet spot. And it usually was held at an offsite to allow to take away from distraction, also put in a different mindset of the competitors. But we does need a senior leadership to drive the membership to come and to take the ownership. And of course, as I said, it needs sufficient time to plan all that. The downside is participation is limited. Not everybody in the team can, or you, like I said, usually we have 40 to 60 members, but we have done smaller simulation up to 20 members. In the good old days, we need to think about travel, logistics, venue, accommodation costs, etc., etc., and also lost time in the travel and logistic support, and then the pre-read. So with that, I will pause here. I'll pass it to my good friend John to take it to the virtual world. So this is the world that we used to live. Now over to John, and I'm gonna go to the virtual world. Thank you. And
great, thank you, Rafat, and thanks for the background. So what I'd like to do in the next 10 or so minutes is walk you through how we've converted what Rafat just walked you through of in-person workshops and war games, if you will, to how to adapt these and change these to work better in a virtual world. So next slide, please. Just to start out, this isn't the first time in the world that we've had big disturbances. So these are 2 images, one from about 10 years ago and one from about 11 years ago. The one on the left you can see is a volcano, actually a volcano in Iceland, and my Icelandic is very poor. It's named as Eyjafjallajökull. It erupted in the spring of 2010, and for Europeans, it resulted in multiple weeks of the airspace in Europe being grounded, and folks were either stuck or couldn't travel. Same for the other panel. It's not COVID virus. It's actually a virus called the swine flu, excuse me, from 2009. And if you were doing any business in Asia at the time, you were really curtailed in terms of going to China or Asia-Pac countries. So we're living in a world of COVID. No one will know what the future will bring, but a couple of things have happened in the last 10 years. Technology's got really better. Most folks are used to having webcams and better internet speeds, and we can do a lot more things virtually than we could have done 10 years ago. So with that, let's take a look at how we convert things going forward. First of all, as Rafat alluded to, it's really kind of a cycle that we're looking here at. And one is we have an issue, strategy, or tactic. We have some insights, and we want to take that and work it up into development of what should we do. And that's where this virtual or in-person simulation or workshop comes into play. Then we want to take that one step further and really implement that into action. So it's the classic cycle that you're all familiar with. The trick is there's a lot of things we can do, and it's really getting to that focus of what actions are prioritized and who should be doing it and how should we be doing it. The devil's really in the details. So let's go to the next slide, please. First of all, as Rafat mentioned, in the old days, we used to spend a couple days. I think the sweet spot, quite frankly, was about a day and a half. If you ask folks that were involved with setting up a lot of these workshops to do it. Now we need to divide that into blocks. So what you're doing is you're dividing time blocks, you're dividing energy, and you're dividing the ability to get folks to focus and really concentrate on something. So now you'll see in the slide that we recommend no more than about 3.5, 4 hours maximum in each of these sessions, of course, with breaks and some exercises to get people engaged and keep them engaged, and then break it up in blocks. And I give you a little aside story. About a week ago, Rafat and I were talking about these types of events to a potential client, and one of their senior executives asked me, well, John, why would someone want to join and come back to, the second block or the third block? What's in it for them? And I said, well, that's really up to the planners and how you design these workshops so that you want to make it engaging and that they come back to see what happens next. The analogy I used was Netflix. Many of you watch Netflix. You may watch Netflix series. Well, why do you watch the next Netflix series? You want to see what happens. You want to see what happens next. Same thing here. We use those psychology principles to really engage folks to do it. Next slide, please, Rafat. We talked about briefing books, and for those with a keen eye, you might have seen we put a little comically in the slide that Rafat mentioned, 157 slide briefing book in that email that was sent to me in our hypothetical example. And I think we've all been there. We've gotten these huge briefing decks, and usually they come at the last minute, and they may have a lot of commercial or market data or clinical data or R&D data. And unless you're really disciplined and have the time on your hand, it's hard to really do them justice. So we think mixing this up and to do things a little bit different of gamification, quizzing, learning from others, there's much better ways where you're trying to level the playing field and get folks to have a common basis of knowledge. And the traditional PowerPoint or PDF heavy content briefing book is just, I think, from days in the past. Next slide, please. So the idea here is to schedule in a virtual environment what we would do in person. You would have breakout sessions and you would have plenum or group sessions. And the idea here is to put together a schedule, a program where you have some exercises to do, but you want to be very careful in picking out those exercises and how you use people's time and energy to get the most output from them. So I'll give you a tip. One of the things we notice is to start right away in a brainstorming in a breakout session may not be the most efficient way. People sometimes like to have a few minutes to think, to look at the context of something and kind of write out a short list of ideas. And then you have a much more efficient discussion forum than if you just start free-form brainstorm. Same thing in the plenum. If you keep these structured in terms of what are the goals, outputs, and use this idea of parking lots for a parking lot being a placeholder for ideas or topics that are not in the focus, this really helps you, get to your goals. Next slide, please. Main thing in virtual forums is getting engagement. And this is quite, frankly, an art form and a bit of psychology and a little bit of keeping people interested and curious, as I mentioned. There's some tips on the slide. Timing is obviously a good thing. Keeping it dynamic, there's a lot of tools that you can use to brainstorm, polling, whiteboards, notes, videos. We did a war game earlier this summer, a virtual war game as we called it, where we had the CEO give a video introduction. Okay, that's pretty normal, but she personalized it. She knew who was going to be coming. She mentioned a few people by name. She was very specific in terms of how this would help the organization improve and get to market with a pending launch. So it was really not your standard CEO message, but it was really tailored for the audience and including the audience. And folks were quite impressed that she took the time, given her busy schedule, to do this. On the technical side, you can get a lot of the kinks worked out in advance, and so that everyone knows how the technology works and that you've picked the right tools and everyone's briefed. And then the idea of micro breaks, where you take people and say, okay, we're going to have a stretch break. We're going to do a few exercises. We've done some really creative things where most people are, sitting in front of a monitor or standing in front of a monitor, as I am. And after, a while, it can be taxing. So you want to be able to physically get folks engaged and moving and get the blood flowing. Next slide, please. One of the things we've learned is these roles of team leader and facilitator are very important. And we recommend that for most of these virtual workshops, you have both. The team leader is really someone from the organization that essentially is leading, especially those breakout groups or that working team, to look at the actual exercises that you're trying to do. And then backing that person up is a facilitator, sometimes from an agency, sometimes internally, but is really driving the technology, scribing and keeping time, prompting and probing, if you will, making sure everyone's participating. One of the tips we have is we want everyone to be on video and be seen. We don't want folks to say, oh, my webcam is not working, or there's a connection issue. So during the time that they're joining for this virtual workshop or competitive simulation, we want their focus and energy. And in return, we're going to give them breaks. We're going to give them time to have a bio break, to get a cup of coffee or tea, to check an email, so forth. So really scheduling this and being clear on that schedule and keeping to that schedule is really important. Next slide, please. We could have a whole presentation on technology. Most of you know the platforms you see on the left panel, and they're growing by the day. And in fact, Rafat and I were talking earlier today about other platforms that we both encountered. So essentially, it's really matching the platform to your need and obviously your organization's ability to use those platforms. If you're interested in this topic of, what's the best platform if you're going to run one of these, please contact either Rafat or I. We've done some benchmarking. We'd happy to give you our personal experiences and some of the pros and cons. But at the end of the day, you can have the best platform in the world, but if folks don't really know how to operate it and use it, it doesn't matter. So the platform is just a tool, really, an enabler to help you get to where your goal is. And don't get hung up on the platform. Like I said, many of these have a lot of the same features, and there's kind of a convergence going on in terms of their feature set. That's a story for a sidebar. We did a survey over the summer where we had a 2-day or 2-session, each was 4 hours, kind of strategy, virtual competitive simulation. This is the actual output from it. We did polling using a tool from one of the platforms you just seen. And I'd like to call your attention to maybe, Rafat, you can move your mouse to the top 3 learnings there, where you see it's really learning and deeper understanding, having this multidisciplinary opportunity for exchange, and discussion. So these were kind of the top respondents where folks said, you know, what was the most value? And in our experience and in our travels, many times, even though we're very connected with each other, but having focused time to really talk about deep issues and really kind of peel back layers of the onion, using that analogy, is really important. And then from that, translating to that, what are we going to do about it and what's the action plan? So that's the takeaway there. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. I'd like to just leave you with a few key takeaways. First of all, as Rafat mentioned, preparation is key. So you want to plan this well. You want to really look at what are you trying to accomplish in terms of the objectives, what are the outputs you're looking for. Don't try to just take what you would do physically and make it virtual. It's not going to work. I can speak from experience. So you really need to focus time and energy, and probably a couple of hours, 3-4 max would be our recommendation. The idea of folks are going to be excited to join and they're going to participate and be engaged. You need to really structure that, and there's a lot of ways you can do it. I've touched on a few, but if you're interested in more tools and techniques, again, please reach out to each of us. We're happy to give you some of our learnings. Keep it simple. You can make all sorts of fancy tools and complicated exercises, but really you need to keep things focused and clear, and don't get too enamored with the next sexy widget or app add-in that you can put in some of these platforms. There's technology with polling, quizzing, short videos, ways to get folks engaged and keep them wanting to know what happens next, as I mentioned. And then you're building, as a CI practitioner, your know-how, and hopefully that will be a skill set that will help your teams and your organization going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rafat if he has any further takeaways. Thank you for your attention and this opportunity to give this presentation.
John, thank you very much. People, the audience, we will have a separate Q&A because this is a pre-recorded video. So unfortunately, we cannot do a Q&A in a live. But Amy and Kelly have organized a separate Q&A. But if you do want to if there is any burning questions, please email to info@lifesciencedynamics.com, and we will respond accordingly, and we will aim to respond within 48 hours. So thank you very much. We both really enjoyed to be here today with you, sharing our experience. And I hope that there was some key takeaways from this talk that you can take and implement in your own organization. With that, bye from now.